Okay, now we're going to have our forum for Congressional District 2 to replace the retiring Ted Poe. And we are going to use the same format as in the first forum. Each candidate will have 3 minutes for an opening statement. There will be a series of questions. Unfortunately, I don't have any nice batting practice fastballs like I had for the judges. And then there will be 2 minutes each for closing at the end. All right, and so we will begin opening statements with Mr. Roberts.
Do the right ping pong ball. Keep your giving. Oh my Lord, brother. 2 down, 1 down. This is the debate coach in me. You always want to know your tongue signals. Okay. How are you, folks? It is fabulous to be home in the middle of my house district and to be here with you. Thank you for taking the time to come out tonight. Many of you have heard my story before. I grew up in Amarillo, Texas. I was raised by my grandparents. The day after I was born, my dad left for boot camp at Fort Hood. And my grandparents took me home and they raised me my entire life. I have vivid memories of seeing my grandmother come home in the morning as I awoke, as my granddad left after she had worked the graveyard shift at Levi Strauss. We didn't have a lot of money, but I tell you what we had. I had absolute love and absolute support through my life. They were hard workers and they taught me how to work hard, and they taught me the importance of integrity and commitment. I began working when I was 14 years of age with my mentor, who's still my mentor today. I delivered prescription drugs in a very small retail drugstore. And I saved enough to put my way through Texas Tech University, where I received a business degree and was the first, Sweet 16, first in my family to ever graduate from college. I went on and have spent the last 30 years in business, taking small entrepreneurial businesses and growing them nationwide, creating quality jobs. Holly and I have had the blessing of living and raising our boys in this community for the past 16 years and have been involved very deeply in our church, teaching. I serve as a deacon, as well as nonprofit organizations in our community, as well as in the chamber. And that's a huge blessing of being a part of this community. In 2015, when our wonderful state representative, Patricia Harless, decided to retire, I felt like it was my responsibility and calling to step up and to serve. And so individuals, our kids, had the same opportunity that I did growing up. And it's been a blessing to serve in the Texas House with fabulous folks like Valerie and Mike. I'm very proud of my accomplishments last session. I passed 5 bills that Governor Abbott signed into law, one being a bill to eliminate unnecessary and burdensome regulations on small businesses and on individuals. Additionally, I co-authored and voted for bills that are important to us as conservatives, to ban sanctuary cities to protect our families, to eliminate partial birth abortions to protect our unborn. We did something that's unique. We balanced a budget with $4 billion less revenue, something the federal government hasn't done. I would be honored to take my proven record and my proven conservative leadership and my knowledge and love for this community to Washington to serve you. And let me just say this, I respect Dan greatly, and I appreciate his selfless service, and it is an honor to be running in this runoff with him. So, thank you.
And now the opening statement from Mr. Crenshaw.
Good evening. It's great to be here with you all. It's truly an honor. A lot of you have heard my story. I grew up in Katy, Texas. Followed my father around in his career in the oil and gas industry. We lived in war-torn countries like Colombia, where I learned Spanish and learned how great of a country this really is. I learned Texas values from my mother at a young age, before she died of cancer. She taught me integrity, respect. She taught me that God and the foundation of the church is what makes our country so strong. She taught me integrity. And I think most importantly, she taught me what it means to never quit on those who love you. I joined the SEAL teams in 2006, had a 10-year career, and over the course of that career, deployed to places like Iraq and Afghanistan. On my 3rd deployment, I was nearly killed and blinded by an IED blast. I didn't quit. I didn't go on disability. I deployed 2 more times. Back to the Middle East and then to Korea. When I couldn't deploy anymore, in order to serve my country, I got an education and got my master's degree in public administration from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. I'm truly qualified with the right experience and the right education to make federal policy. There's a few lessons I learned in the SEAL teams that I'd like to share with you. First one, service. This symbol that I wear on my lapel is the same one we wear on our uniforms. It's the only symbol in American government where the eagle's head is bowed, not upright. It's bowed because we know the importance of servitude to the American people. Second lesson, always take care of your people. In the SEAL teams, leaders eat last. You make sure your men eat first. We take care of our teammates before we tend to our own wounds. Congress should be no different. You take care of your people. Texans know a little bit about that, and we demonstrated it during Hurricane Harvey. Third, plan, preparation. Be hungry for more knowledge and be ready to take that next mountaintop and that next mission. So what's our mission here? I think we've got a few. I'll just name a couple of them. Flood control policy. In this area right now, we're still waiting on a 3rd reservoir to be built. We're talking about doing 3-year-long studies. It'll be up to us in Congress to make sure that money gets there, make sure that local and state politicians that didn't do their job before are doing it now, and then we get this done. One of my first acts will be to make sure that there's a waiver for procedural requirements for the Army Corps of Engineers so that that happens immediately and without delay, because it can. Border security. We're on the front lines, and that needs to happen now. And third, ensuring that Texans and conservative values have a future. That we put leaders in place that will bring more people to the party, that will inspire the younger generation and bring them to our side. And that's what I plan on doing. I hope to have your support. Thank you all.
All right, now we should have time for about 7 questions. And so we will start off the first one.
Too much?
But who knows? And if there's a fist fight, I'm getting out of here. You know, the one thing I found out, the toughest part about this job, you have to stand here and look stone-faced. And then they both stand right in front of me, and I realize I don't have a poker face. So just don't look at me, look at them while they're talking. All right, the first question, and we'll begin with Mr. Crenshaw, is most Republicans agree that spending in Washington, D.C. is out of control. At the same time, Texas has received part of a $90 billion spending bill to aid in the recovery from Harvey, and there may be billions more to come. How would you curb government spending and still treat CD2 flood victims fairly?
Well, that $90 billion, first of all, it's necessary. You have to spend money on what's actually necessary, and I think here we know that it's necessary. Only about $13.3 billion of that is actually coming to Texas out of that $90 billion. It may not be enough. We may have to do more at the local and state level to raise funds for what we actually need here and for the projects that we need here for disaster relief. It's not just recovery, it's investing in our future. But the question was, how do we reduce spending? We have to focus on mandatory spending. That's the actual driver of debt. Discretionary spending is what we always fight about because it's appropriated annually. What's not appropriated annually is mandatory spending. That's Social Security, it's Medicare, it's Medicaid. We have to make some hard choices. We have to talk about things like raising the retirement age. We have to move to personal retirement accounts for Social Security so that we can actually have a solvent system before 2034 when it's actually going to go insolvent. That's right around the corner. That's what we need to do. I wasn't sure actually how long I had, so I just wrapped it up. But it's as simple as that, and that takes courage. It takes leaders who aren't afraid to touch the so-called third rail of politics, which is entitlement spending. That's what we have to do. And I know that our leadership is talking about it right now. Well, I'm ready for it. In 2019, that's exactly what we're going to be doing. We're going to be tackling the hard stuff. It's not the simple appropriations that we do every year. It's mandatory spending. So please put me up there so that we can fight for that like the way we're supposed to and the way Texans are used to doing, which is a balanced budget. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Roberts, the question is, most Republicans agree that spending in Washington, D.C. is out of control. At the same time, Texas has received part of a $90 billion spending bill to aid in Harvey recovery, and there may be more coming. How would you curb government spending and still treat CD2 flood victims fairly?
Let's look at two separate issues. One, budget out of control. Two, disaster recovery and flood mitigation. First of all, let me say this. I feel this is a strength that I bring to Congress because of my experience. I currently serve on appropriations. I serve on the subcommittee for budget transparency and reform. We had to balance a budget because that is the one mandate Texas Constitution demands on the Texas legislature is to pass a balanced budget. We did it with $4 billion less revenue this year. I served on the subcommittee for healthcare where approximately $80 million of the largest portion of the budget is represented in those dollars. The way you balance the budget, guess what you do? You make difficult decisions. You make very difficult decisions. But you make those decisions because you know it's for the betterment. We say it's out of control. Well, every day we add $1.3 trillion to our national debt. We start by getting rid of the deep state, the federal bureaucracy. That is real. That is wasting dollars that has absolutely no value. Now let's talk about Harvey. I serve on the subcommittee, appropriations subcommittee for disaster recovery and relief. We have to demand, from a congressional perspective, accountability on those dollars. I've actually put in a release out. Right now, we have $500 million in aid that the federal government has given us in the first tranche. The second tranche will be additional $500 million. We haven't utilized one of those dollars yet. Federal government needs to demand that the state is transparent and that those dollars are used accordingly. I will fight for our district and I will fight for our needs, but at the same time, there has to be accountability with your dollars. Thank you.
All right, I'll point out a couple of things. One, since we had a CD2 debate here a little while back, a lot of these questions have input from the audience the first time and questions that were pushed forward, but we also have some questions up here from the audience that we'll try to get to. And second, sort of to Mr. Crenshaw's point, just because we give you 2 minutes doesn't mean you have to take all of it. So, but you know, they're running for Congress, so you can imagine. All right. Our next question, we'll begin with Mr. Roberts, is on foreign policy. Some people feel that the U.S. has the moral responsibility to exert leadership in foreign policy to help spread democracy. Others feel the U.S. has no business trying to serve as the world's police force. What is your philosophy of the role of the U.S. in world affairs?
It's a great foreign extemporaneous question. I think we do have a moral imperative as the United States as being a superpower. We have a moral imperative to ensure that human rights are upheld. But we have a moral imperative to ensure that we adequately fund our military, that we have the adequate number of personnel, that we have the adequate resources, and we equip these young men and women when we send them in harm's way. I believe the way we achieve diplomacy is through strength. And we leverage that strength in areas that rogue regimes are suppressing human rights. I feel like we have that obligation, but at the same time, we have an obligation at home as well. We have an obligation to protect our citizens, and that means everything from border security to immigration reform, putting America first. We are a superpower. We are a leader. I think President Trump is doing a fabulous job in repositioning us in that regard. Because as Churchill indicated, if you've seen The Darkest Hour, be relentless. Be relentless. There's some regimes, diplomacy will not work, okay? I don't think we can close a blind eye to areas that are being suppressed and where there's extreme human rights violations. So I think we need to equip our military, we need to engage in wars with the intent to win.
All right, Mr. Crenshaw, again, the question is, some people feel the U.S. has the moral responsibility to exert leadership in foreign policy to help spread democracy. Others feel that the U.S. has no business trying to serve as the world's police force. What is your philosophy of the role of the U.S. in world affairs?
I'm glad we agree that it is a moral imperative. That U.S. leadership is paramount to security, both here and abroad. Global security is American security. That doesn't mean that we get mired in endless nation building. And sometimes we don't walk that balance so well. In Iraq, we were doing well. But unfortunately, sometimes we think in 4-year increments. The Obama administration pulled us out. And what do we get? We got ISIS. Because there was an American power vacuum. That can't ever happen. You have to put people like me in harm's way to protect the American people here. Because the world is small and it's shrinking. One thing I like to point out is that Texans really represent to the rest of America what it means to be that shining light on the hill. That's what I love about the 2nd District. Because we care about things like patriotism and freedom and the red, white, and blue. And we demonstrate that. And America as a whole has to demonstrate that same thing to the rest of the world. I had an interesting talk today by the founder of FLAG. It's an organization that teaches patriotism, essentially, and American values to young people, in elementary school, middle school, high school. He brought up something interesting. Imagine a world without America. North Korea probably just invade South Korea. China would invade Taiwan, build more islands in the Pacific. Russia would have its way, probably invade more countries. Middle East would go to war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, possibly nuclear by now. Africa, warlords would be tearing through it, even more so than they are now. Imagine the world without America. It's a scary place. That's why we're the leaders of this world. Thank you.
The more I look at these are really mean questions. I wouldn't want me as a moderator. Last year, Congress repealed Obamacare's individual mandate, but left many other provisions of the law in place. So we have a 2-part question, like a law school final. What role, if any, does the federal government have in ensuring that health care is available and affordable? And what provisions of Obamacare would you repeal and which ones would you keep in place? I'm going to start with Mr. Crenshaw. By the way, I'll repeat these questions at any time if you want me to.
Repeal all of it. Okay? That's simple. The mandate's a start. I mean, the mandate is truly anti-American. You cannot force people to purchase something they don't want to purchase. I understand the logic behind it, economically speaking, but it didn't work. I understand the logic behind Obamacare. It didn't work. That's what we're seeing now. We're seeing premiums rise at rates faster than ever before. There was a recent study on this, actually, and they're measuring the time before 2014 when Obamacare was implemented, and from 2014 until now, the rates of premium increases are exponentially higher. The whole thing has to be repealed. We have to stop kidding ourselves into believing that the federal government is so omniscient and so good at what it does, they can actually manage healthcare. It is the most complex industry we have. It has to be taken down to the local level. It has to. It doesn't mean that we do it perfectly at the local level. We have to do a better job with primary care. I've talked to a lot of doctors about this in Texas Medical Center. They acknowledge that we're the best in the world pretty much across the board, but we fail sometimes in primary care. We have to have a more competitive industry there. We have to look at things like telemedicine and subscription services. These things already exist, kind of concierge services where you can pay doctors just a certain amount of money per month. It's cheap, $100, $200, and they will be on call for you. And they will manage your care. Put the power back in the hands of doctors, the ones you trust. It's really that simple. And it's listening. It's listening. So the first thing I will do is create a committee of experts, ones I already know from the Texas Medical Center, guys like David Ballat, in the healthcare industry, so that we find the exact right solutions, but keep the federal government out of it. Because as much as we would love the idea that we can fix something, we have to be humble and understand the limits of the human condition. We cannot do it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm definitely repeating this question. Last year, Congress repealed Obamacare's individual mandate, but left many of the other provisions of the law in place. What role, if any, does the federal government have in ensuring that health care is available and affordable, and what provisions of Obamacare would you repeal and which would you leave in place?
If it's okay, I'm going to reverse questions. First, what would we keep in Obamacare? Absolutely nothing. Individual mandates, I think the way we get rid of it is because it's so politically sensationalized. If you mention repeal Obamacare, the Dems go nuts. If you do what we did, that President Trump did in the tax cut bill, you begin dismantling it piece by taking care away the individual mandates, then you eventually get rid of it. Now, let's talk about the federal government's role. The federal government should not have a role in health care. The federal government should not have a role in the delivery of health care. I serve on the, as I mentioned, Appropriations Healthcare Subcommittee. Texas rightfully did not participate in the exchange program. We advocated and received a 1115 waiver that said, federal government, you give us the money and we will manage it. We capitate 90% of the health care cost of Medicaid, which means we pass the risk on to the private sector because the private sector does it best, and we create competition. Now, the only comparison between Dan and I, compare and contrast, will be on policy. It will be my votes, am I proven what I voted for, and it'll be Dan in terms of what he says in campaign, on websites, etc. So I want to point out a couple things that are somewhat contradictory to what Dan might have said. He first of all, in his website, said, when we force insurance to cover routine visits or treatment, the cost of those treatments naturally skyrocket and premiums follow. As a result, healthcare is overused. Well, we need to advocate for preventive care because otherwise we raise the cost of healthcare overall. Another thing, and I'll be interested in Dan to speak to this, is I'm for limited government. Dan mentions the VA moving towards Medicare for prescription drug and acknowledges the VA being socialized medicine. So that's a compare and contrast. Thank you.
In order to be fair, if someone's going to directly question somebody, we are going to give them a chance to respond in their closing. We may end up having to add some time if necessary, because I'm sure Mr. Crenshaw had a 2-minute closing prepared. So, as with the judges, we asked some policy questions, but we also asked a question about sort of how they plan to do things, what kind of judge they plan to be. And we have a question like that for our congressional candidates. The question, and we'll begin with Mr. Roberts, is this. New members of Congress have to decide early what path they want to pursue in their congressional career, whether they want to try to climb the committee ladder and eventually become a chairman, or whether they want to try to climb the leadership ladder and maybe be a whip or speaker or whatnot, and gain influence that way. What course do you plan to pursue? And if leadership, how can you use that to help the district? And if a committee, which committee and why?
Yes, would be the answer to both. I go, as I did with Texas House, with one purpose only. That is to represent the 2nd Congressional District and the issues that are important to you and to be your voice and to achieve results. I was asked when I went to the Texas House, which team are you going to be on? And I said, I'm going to be on one team. I'm going to be on Texas House District 1 2016 because that's who I represent. What I will do the first day before we're sworn in, I will go to Speaker Ryan, I will go to his chief of staff, I will work around to the various committee chairmen of committees I have interest in, such as Energy and Commerce. I will give them my background, and I will say, I am here to work. Put me in, coach. I did that, the Texas House. As a freshman, I was appointed, typically get 2 standing committees. I was appointed to Appropriations Committee. I was appointed to the Subcommittee of Healthcare, Subcommittee of Budget Transparency and Reform, County Affairs, the Port Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee. I was elected by my peers in this district to represent our area on the Republican Policy Caucus. I'm going to work, and the way the process I believe will work is when you show that you're a hard worker, you will get chairmanships. You will, through being able to build consensus, you'll be recognized for your leadership abilities. And that's what I've shown in the past, and I plan on doing the same thing to best represent this congressional district. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Crenshaw, again, the question is, new members of Congress have to decide early what path they want to pursue in their congressional career, whether they want to try to climb the committee ladder and eventually become a chairman, or whether they want to climb the leadership ladder and gain influence that way. For that matter, whether they want to just give 1-minute speeches and do nothing. What course do you plan to pursue? And if leadership, how can you use that to help the district? If a committee, which committee do you hope to chair and why?
Primary consideration here is how to help the people of the 2nd District. Where can you do that from? Well, I laid out a few missions that we have. It's border security and flood control policy. Homeland Security Committee seems like a pretty good place to be. Well, Border Security oversees FEMA. Transportation Committee oversees the Army Corps of Engineers. These are the places you have to put pressure on in order to help people right now. It's not about making a name for myself. It's about what I can do for you. Showing leadership is more than just a vote. It's more than just some selfish sense of authority. It's that leadership and its passion and its inspiration. It's connecting with people. It's building relationships on Capitol Hill so that you can move the ball forward. I'm the only one with any experience working across federal agencies in some of the scariest environments imaginable. Working with the State Department, working with foreign governments, the intelligence community, law enforcement agencies, the military, of course. I'm the only one who understands that. I'm the only one who has a master's degree in policy. And when we talk about healthcare and what we're supposed to do to fix that, it takes somebody with a master's degree in policy and understanding of healthcare economics for you to know that when you overly increase the rolls on health insurance, sometimes you get overuse. And because I've studied these things, I can point you to the studies in Oregon where this is proven. But when they put too many people on Medicaid, it gets overused and the health outcomes do not improve. And premiums skyrocket. That answers the question. That's why it's on my website. Because I care about policy, because I'm educated in it, and I know what we have to do to fix it. Thank you.
Don't go too far, you're up again. The next question is, what is your position on DACA and whether people who were brought here illegally as children should get to stay, and should they have a path to citizenship?
I've never had this question. That's a joke. We have it every single time before. Okay. The only way we can talk about legal status for the so-called dreamers is when we have border security, we end chain migration, we end sanctuary cities. Good for Texas on this one. Come on, let's applaud for Texas real quick. Our legislation's going somewhere. California, you're next. And when we talk about legal status, we're not talking about some expedited path to citizenship. That is a very important distinction. And there's a reason for that. It's not just because, rah, 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 this is America and we said so. It's because it gets in front of the legal immigrants, the good people who are coming into this country the right way. Like my stepmother, she's right here.
I'm legal.
She's legal. That would be a travesty to any of our ancestors who came here legally, to any of those still waiting in line. There is a process, and that's what we abide by. Just because someone is angry, just because they're rioting in the streets, doesn't mean they're right, doesn't mean they have the right policy. As conservatives, we know that. We don't necessarily give in to emotion and anger. We're the party of good governance and common sense. Sometimes that gets us some heat. But that's all right, we can take it. And I'm the kind of guy who can. So thank you.
All right, Mr. Roberts, the question is, what is your position on DACA and whether people who were brought here illegally as children should get to stay, and should they have a path to citizenship?
Yeah. Let's look at immigration in general, and Dan and I are in agreement on a number of things as it relates to this. First of all, let's talk about immigration. How many of you think, let's just use common, and by the way, I'm a common sense, pragmatic, look at real issues, come up with real solution guy, okay? I'm not the brightest bulb, but I can pretty well figure most things out. So, I come over illegally. Let's say we go to Russia. And I'm there because I drew this lucky ticket, all the brioche soup I want the rest of my life. And I get to bring my family with me. It doesn't matter if they were mass murderers, but because I have this ticket, everybody gets to come. Does that seem logical to you? No, not at all. We have to deal with the issues. We have to stop the infiltration of illegal migration. Absolutely. Especially with the issues we're seeing this day and age. Let's talk about DACA. We have a large Hispanic ministry at Champion Force Baptist. Our Hispanic minister came over. It took him 13 years to go through the process to finally become a legalized citizen. Okay? Every person that I've met that has gone through that process, I ask the question, because I figure if anybody's going to be sympathetic, they are. Should we provide these kids with legal citizenship status? You know what they say? Absolutely no. We came over and we worked to get through it. They should as well. And I agree with them 100%.
All right, Mr. Roberts, don't go anywhere. Under what circumstances would you support sending the U.S. Armed Forces into combat overseas?
Under what circumstances? First of all, I would turn to very tactical individuals who have spent their life in service. And this is one thing you learn in politics. Anybody that's sort of like insurance, if they tell you they're an expert in every field of insurance, don't buy from them, okay? Public policy is complex. You have to put individuals around you with experience and extreme expertise. Dan would be fabulous in the Department of Defense and the State Department, because I have faith that he would get some things done. So you have to be able to look at both sides, and when they present why we need to engage, okay, you have to do a risk reward. What is it that we're trying to achieve? What's our goal? Will the mission accomplish it? If so, how? Are we resourced adequately? Are we providing, do we have the ally strength? I would listen to these folks who, this is what they do. This is how they spent their life and their dedicated service. And at the end of the day, when a decision's made, you have to be behind that decision and 100% support. So I would support our military and those who are in leadership when they have done a full due diligence and is a unified recommendation. Now, when we send our young men and women in harm's way, we go for one purpose and one purpose only. That is to win. And that is to win. Because it is not, and Dan can speak to this, I don't take anything lightly when I am making decisions that affect others' lives. And it's a high bar and it's a heavy responsibility. So if we're going to do it, we're going to make sure that we're in it to win it.
Mr. Crenshaw, the question is, under what circumstances would you support sending the U.S. Armed Forces into combat overseas?
It's a general question, so you're going to get a fairly general answer. I'll say a few things first. Nobody knows the horrors of war better than I do. That was more of a sad applause than a happy applause, but I've lost a lot of friends. I've been to a lot of funerals. I'm only 34. But we're not victims. Not at all. We would do it again in a heartbeat. And it's our duty to live because of the men we've lost overseas and the women we've lost overseas. Now, Kevin isn't right about everything he said. It is not a decision for experts in the military to make. What they tell you as a civilian leader is how they would accomplish the mission that you set out for them. It is a political decision when you send men and women overseas. It is 100% a political decision. I know because I've been in the military. Those aren't the discussions we have. We can advise on how we would do it, how many people we would lose, what our chances are, but in the end, it's a decision that comes from here. And it's a heavy one. So under what conditions? Well, is there a threat to the United States, for starters? Is there a threat to our allies? These are strategic questions we ask as policymakers. You have to know that going into this. There's one policy area that you cannot research, that you can't rely on the Heritage Foundation to tell you what to think, or the Cato Institute. It is national security. It's defense. It's intelligence. It's foreign affairs. You need experience in these things. I'm the only one with the experience, because I've worked across all these agencies. I've lived abroad. I've worked in multiple embassies. I've created strategic plans, the kinds we're talking about implementing. That's the kind of experience we need in Congress to hit the ground running. And that's why I'm running. Thank you.
Sam, are you glad that we don't have to answer these questions? The ones I asked you were a whole lot easier. Actually, I'm looking at Harless over here and thinking, oh great, yet another member with better hair than me. Anyway, the next question is, and they don't get any easier, folks. Can the federal budget ever be balanced, and if so, how?
I'm gonna get a little technical. We've already talked about budgeting a little bit, so I'll say again how important it is to tackle mandatory spending. And we can talk about discretionary all day long. Discretionary spending, by the way, it's the budget that's actually appropriated annually. It funds every department in the government. And yeah, you can cut some things from that. Even the military, by the way. You know, the military doesn't ask for that $700 billion price tag. The Congress gives it to them, and they have their reasons. There are ways to cut spending. We can change the way we do budgeting. We can stop doing continuing resolutions for the Department of Defense so they can actually plan ahead and have a realistic and common sense contracting and acquisitions mechanisms in place. That would save money. And we'd be better prepared to face our enemies abroad. But we have to tackle mandatory spending. That is the true driver of our debt. It's at $20 trillion. It's not growing at $1 trillion a day. I heard that before. That's not correct. But it is at about over $20 trillion right now. And our deficits by 2020 might be $1 trillion a year. That's scary. We have to touch that third rail of politics. Now, do we have to balance it perfectly? No, let me get actually technical with you. If you reduce the deficit as a percentage of GDP lower than the growth as a percentage of GDP, we eventually get to 0%. It takes a while, but we eventually get to 0% debt as a percentage of GDP. That's a healthy economy. That's what we need to do. We need to focus on pro-growth policies. Thank you, Trump, for doing that. I'm not so sure about these tariffs right now because they're not good for this district, but pro-growth is the way to go. We need that so that our growth as a percentage of GDP is higher than our deficit as a percentage of GDP. That's the road to a healthy economy. Thank you.
Mr. Roberts, the question is, can the federal budget ever be balanced, and if so, how?
Well, we do it in the great state of Texas. Absolutely it can be. And there's 4 different areas I want to address, hopefully. We'll get to at least a couple of them. First, the deep state. How many of you watch Hannity and hear about the deep state and the federal bureaucracy? Friends, it is real. I was speaking to a member of the Trump administration last week. I said, okay, a key priority of mine is to tackle the budget deficit and to move us towards a balanced budget. I voted for Article 5 legislation this past legislative session, where we passed a bill, as did Professor Schofield, voted for it, that required the federal government to do 2 things, balance a budget and term limits, which I support both. The way you do, first of all, is we have to go in, and with my business experience, I've dealt with this, we have to break the back of the unions. The federal government bureaucracy is being run by unions. Did you know that those that are over agencies that are political appointments cannot fire federal employees? They have to relocate them or hope they retire. That is why you see them staying forever. They do not leave. They file grievances. That is where the waste is. We have to break the back of the bureaucracy. Second of all, we have to deal with the 60%, that being the non-discretionary budget. We have to look and we have to cut entitlements. We have to look and we have to see which programs are not achieving their stated goals. And you eliminate those programs. We need to look at a zero-based budgeting. How many in business take your budget every year and escalate it 5%? Nobody does. They have to justify their dollars. It can be balanced.
All right, Mr. Roberts, I'm going to go here up next. It's really simple. It's a snake draft. Apparently you people are just not fantasy sports people. All right, the question is, are you pro-life? And if so, what does that mean to you? And why are you pro-life?
Great question. Thank you for asking. I am pro-life and I have a proven record. My life stance really disseminates more than the public policy, but it's personal because you heard my life story, being raised by my grandparents. I have been, this past session, based upon my work, I received an A rating from the Texas Right to Life. I received a Faith and Family Award from the Texas Values, and I'm endorsed by Texas Alliance for Life. I voted for every piece of pro-life legislation. I missed one amendment vote. I was in the bathroom. What pro-life means to me is, it's from the womb to the tomb, okay? Life begins at conception, and we protect that life, okay? Once it's born, we have a responsibility. I passed a faith-based foster care bill this year to give kids a chance in single-family homes or in homes where their parents have left them. We have a responsibility to put them in a place that they can be a contribution, okay, that they can have life. But also, we have a responsibility at the end of life. Did you know before this legislative session and a bill that we passed into law that a medical ethics board could unilaterally make a decision to end your life? Yeah. Guess what? Valerie, can they do it now?
No.
No, they cannot do it now. Life is not, you have to look at the whole person. There's a lot of public policy that you can look at both sides and debate. And I've told, there's one thing I will never, ever, ever, ever compromise on, and that is the life issue. I will never, ever vote against a bill or for a bill that does not protect life, and I have a proven record to support that.
Mr. Crenshaw, the question is, are you pro-life? And if so, what does that mean to you and why?
I'm absolutely pro-life. What it means to me, and we agree on this completely. What it means to me is that life does start at conception, and that should be protected. We need to have legal protection over what the human life cycle is, knowing that it begins at conception. The real issue here isn't that whether we all agree or not on being pro-life. The issue is, how are we going to draw more young people into the party given our stance as pro-life? That's the existential question we have as Republicans. So we're not wavering on this, because we're the party of freedom and we're the party of morality. We need to learn how to debate with the left on this. When they claim that they're just trying to protect a woman's choice to do what she wants with her body, well, I agree. You should be able to do whatever you want with your body. But scientifically speaking, show me the medical journal where a fetus is part of your body. What's the body part called? It's a human being. It's a human being. We don't have to make religious arguments about this. We can make scientific ones. We can make moral ones. We can make humanistic arguments. And I don't know that we're doing a good job of it. Maybe they'll still disagree. Maybe at least we can bring them to an honest place where the disagreement is where we value a human life and what part of the life cycle we value that. Then maybe we could at least agree to disagree. But let's bring them to an honest point. No more platitudes, no more euphemisms for abortion. That's the fight that we have. That's the battle of cultures that we have. Mississippi, by the way, just passed a bill. 15 weeks is their limit. Best in the nation. You know Europe is at 12 weeks? That's an abomination. America is too far left on this issue. We can't allow that. So I think you know where I stand. Thank you.
All right, and we will have one final question before each candidate has a 2-minute closing statement. And the question, of course, Mr. Crenshaw, you go first. They're going to get used to this just in time for the debate.
I don't know why we're not used to it. Usually we have 24 people that we share with.
All right, what country or organization do you believe is the biggest threat to U.S. national security, and what would you recommend Congress do about it?
Good question. You added organization in there. That is an important part. It depends on what type of threat we're talking about. Are we talking, I label threats as sort of blood and treasure. So let's talk about blood. Terrorism attacks right now in Austin. We don't know the source of these terrorist attacks. We know they're somewhat sophisticated. Tripwires and such on packages. Doesn't require as much knowledge as you might think. Some people are thinking, he's ex-military or she's ex-military. It's usually a he, let's be honest. Not necessarily. People who live in dirt in Afghanistan make those bombs. They'll do things like put photosensitive paper on an IED so that when you dig it up, it blows up in your face. It blinds you. That's not what happened to me. I just got blown up by another bomb. But this stuff isn't that hard. These are lone wolf terrorist attacks. They're hard to see coming. It's hard to identify the motive. We don't know the motive right now going on in Austin. That's a huge threat because it's not easy to prevent. We'll talk about the Russians. That's a threat as well. Do I think they're going to bomb us with nuclear weapons? No. Because we have mutually assured destruction. They're wasting money right now on increasing the technology of their nuclear arsenal. It's a waste of their time. They're doing it for their internal politics. But they're interfering in our elections, and we know that. I don't think they actually succeeded. We know that as well. That's in the reports that just came out. But they're trying. Chinese, stealing our intellectual property. This gets to the treasure. unfair trade practices. That's a threat to national security. It's a huge threat to national security. We need to focus on our cyber defenses in a big way, ways that we're not doing enough of, coordinating in public-private relationships with private business so that they're protected as well. Got to protect blood and treasure in America. Thank you.
Mr. Roberts, the question is, what country or organization do you believe is the biggest threat to U.S. national security, and what would you recommend Congress do about it?
Today it looks like Cambridge Analytics and Facebook might be right up there. Dan alluded to it, and this guy is going to know, okay? But what we see is like what we saw today and what we see in Austin. It's the enemy we don't know about and can't see that to me seems the most dangerous. It is the Me Too's. It's the individuals that go on the internet and learn how to make a bomb, and then in order to achieve some reward based upon their faith, they create havoc in our nation. And those are the ones that are difficult with all the great intelligence that we may have, okay? Those are hard to detect, and they're hard to detain, and they're hard to control. From a more substantive of who we know, I think it has to be, and I asked Congressman Poe this question about a month ago. I said, Congressman, because he serves on the armed services, etc., who's our greatest threat? And he said, hands down, it's North Korea. Hands down, it's North Korea. He said, they are moving towards nuclear arsenal. They just have to figure out how to carry it. And they are one of those, little Kim is, that's just unpredictable. He says the key to that, though, is China. And we're beginning to make progress with China because China supplies North Korea as the largest supplier of energy to them. We need to continue sanctions. We need to continue mandatory pressure. And we need to continue building our alliance with allies to have them put similar pressure on. And I agree with Dan, cyber terrorism security is a very real and very huge issue.
All right, and with that, the gentleman's time has expired. And before we go to the closing statements, and we'll start with Mr. Roberts and then with Mr. Crenshaw, just a reminder, next month, Tuesday, April 17th, right here in this room, you're going to have the Harris County Republican Party Chairman, Paul Simpson, and the Honorable Stan Stannard, our county clerk, come in and give you a summary of the primary election and kind of let us know where we are going forward. For those of you who are new to the club or not members of the club, we'd love to have you back for that and for all future events. And membership for the year is only what, $30? 25. Can it be a bigger bargain? What is the matter with you? 35 for an entire family. Of course, I was one of 6 kids, so that we'd get you pretty good with that one. But y'all, please join the club and help participate. And again, remember, we're going to need all of y'all in November. And now we're going to proceed to the closing statements. We will begin with Mr. Roberts. Both candidates will have 2 minutes apiece.
I want to thank you again for being here. I know it's been long, but I think I can speak on Dan's behalf, how nice it is to get to talk about policy, where we can actually engage in discussions and interact with you, okay? Because at the end of the day, it is engaged folks like you that are absolutely critical. I'll tell you, our biggest concern in the primary was folks that might not look up from the TV to do what you do, to become informed. So thank you for the time. This election really comes down to more than Dan versus Kevin. Dan is a great guy, I respect, a nice guy. Holly tells me every once in a while I'm a nice guy, okay? I think it comes down to this. It comes down to, in the general election, which Republican do we want to send out of the primary that we believe has the best experience, proven record, ability to go straight ahead on and take on the Democrats in a battle and talk policy, talk experience? Because I tell you what, this guy, they protected him. They put a bubble around him. He's not in a runoff, and they're going to try the Pennsylvania strategy of run straight down the middle. And I say, bring it on. My business experience, my proven record of conservative leadership, and my community involvement and desire to be the people's congressional representative for the 2nd District, I believe is a reason that qualifies for me for this. I hope to earn your vote and your support, and I'd be honored to represent you in Washington.
And now the closing statement from Mr. Crenshaw.
This seat in the U.S. House of Representatives, it's more than just one vote. It's more than just a voice politely asking Washington to listen to us in the 2nd District. You deserve a lion for your cause. And you deserve a vision for the conservative movement. I don't think that vision's all that complicated. We're the party of freedom, of good governance, of morality. We're the guardians of the American identity. What does that mean? Well, I think there's some threats that we face. Those didn't used to just be conservative values. They used to be agreed upon. But now the left, with their notions of false compassion and divisive identity politics, and ever-growing government say in how you live your life, the greatest threat proposed by the left is the undercutting of American values and history and tradition. This idea that America is inherently flawed. The only way to remedy that is socialism and open borders. Well, I think they're wrong. I think we need leaders to stand up to them. We need to do it with good governance and the right policies, the policies we know are right. Fixing our health care, the right education policy, we're focused on programs like vocational training and apprenticeship that actually prepare our youth for the next step. Finally securing our border, finally fixing our debt. Limited government where you put the power at the local level. And we're the guardians of American identity. What does that mean? It means freedom, patriotism, standing up for the red, white, and blue, being proud to be an American again. Not this idea that it's some material place, some land, not connected by culture or history. It is. And it's a story that began in 1776 and became the ideals that we know and love today. And that's what we're about in the 2nd District. That's the kind of voice we deserve in Washington so we can tell the rest of the country what we already know. Thank you, and I hope for your vote in May.
All right, let's have one more big hand for the 2 congressional candidates. Take a second to think about, let's contrast what happened in Russia, where Putin just got himself reelected without any opposition and still had to cheat and stuff the ballot box. And here in the United States, particularly Texas, where these 2 gentlemen running to serve in one of the highest offices in the land came out here on a Tuesday night to see you.